right, so we're back with Greg Carrozza. We did a spectacularly good first half of this interview last month, and I'm really happy that he was able to stick around today and do enough for a second part. So let's jump right into it. Um, a lot of people seem to be stuck in a generation of music that they grew up loving when they became fans of music, and therefore their stuff doesn't sound very contemporary. But for most applications in the world of music for media, the most of the time, they need it to sound contemporary. Reason being that the shows take place today. So whatever kind of music is out there today, that's what kind of music they generally need.
Mhm.
What do you do? I have no idea how old you are. Honestly, you don't need to tell me. But who were some of the acts that were your favorites when you were 18?
Let's see. 18.
Yeah, generally high school, college age. What kind of music did you listen to? Depeche
Well,
Mode.
oh, I love Depeche Mode. Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
feel that. Yeah.
And the Cars,
Okay.
and Prince and
Yeah.
Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind and Fire.
Wow.
Um, and the Commodores. And then it starts to get more eclectic because I also really like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Um, but I really picked up on a lot of 80s stuff. I mean, I really love Billy Joel and Elton John. Um, I love things that were kind of electronic, like The Fix.
Mm.
Um, so it was kind of a mixture
So then,
for
with
sure.
all those in mind, how do
But
you?
you can see those are in a time frame right there.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And so,
yeah, they're in a relatively narrow window of time.
how did you learn to be a writer, a composer that doesn't make music that sounds like some sort of amalgamation of many of those things that you're able to create current sounding hip hop or current sounding EDM, which really have nothing to do with anything that you just mentioned.
Mhm.
So, do you have any advice for other people on how they can break out of that dated sound that is absorbed into their body?
Well, I feel that I'm good at listening and emulating other things. I mean, one of the things I tried to do when I was a teenager was, and I don't think this is different. I mean, I don't think it's different from what others do. I tried to emulate what I heard,
Yeah.
and back then that was pretty tough because it was being done in multi-million-dollar studios, and it was hard to do that in your bedroom or in your basement with a couple of other crazy musicians. Um, but but that's what I tried to do. I always tried to emulate what I heard. So I feel like I got good at that, and that had nothing to do with doing music now. But I feel like I got good at that, and then I just kept doing that. So I've never quite got stuck with the way things sounded. Of course, there's plenty of things that I prefer. I mean, today, literally during lunch, we were playing George Benson on the Apple Music, and I just love. I mean, that's, oh my gosh. He has some great stuff, which has no relevance to doing what I do now
Right.
at all.
But it was
Uh,
classy. I remember the song "Breezin'" was a huge hit, which for
oh,
like a jazz guitar instrumental, kind of a poppy jazzy instrumental thing to be a hit
mhm.
in 1977, 78, something like that. That was
Yeah.
pretty cool.
I was listening to "Turn Your Love Around," which was, I believe, 1981. I mean, it's just an unbelievable song, unbelievable production,
Yeah.
unbelievable mix. The way the parts just they talk to each other. It's just all this call and response in a pop jazz song. It's unbelievable. But in any event, I digress to date myself. The point is listening and emulation, and I think what that takes now is to recognize the tools that are being used and use them. And that is the opposite of a funnel. Back in the day when you listen to a record and you hear something that's apparently a synthesizer sound. Well, it was a fairly finite number of synthesizers that could have been. It was a Moog, it was the Jupiter 8. It was the, or we get a little more into the 80s. It was a Yamaha DX7, a very specific sounding
My
thing that
least favorite synth ever, by the way.
you can't miss what it sounded like back then.
Yeah.
Well, today there's a myriad more choices, and you got to kind of hone in on what sounds are and how they're being produced, and try to use the same kind of tools. Which is not to mean you got to go out and spend, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, because many of these tools are very versatile and can do a lot of different things. I mean, if you use, as an example, we've talked about before, just using Logic, there are plenty of the instruments built in the Logic that are very, very flexible and make very, very current sounding sounds. But what's really current right now are sounds that are have a really sharp and digital kind of attack, and then can have other, a mix of different sustains that come after that. But if you listen to a lot of a lot of pop and the tropical sounds, and even hip hop, a lot of sharp attacks and that kind of stuff, which is hard to make, say, with your traditional analog type of synthesizer. Those are traditionally going to have a softer attack. Even with no attack, it's still kind of a soft attack, as opposed to having, and these are done with synthesizers that use wavetables. So that's what's kind of really popular right now. But of course, somebody's going to look at this video in a few years, and that's not what's going to be current anymore. It's going to be something else. I don't even know what it's going to be. So the point is that you just got to do it by listening and emulating what you hear. And that may or may not be exactly what you think is good based on your own personal experience.
Right.
Which is an easy pitfall to fall into. Again, I've done that many times. I've made plenty of 80s sounding things and think they're great. And maybe they are if we were still in the 80s, which we are not.
I've noticed, coming from an engineering background, even things like reverb is one thing, that the way people use reverb. Are they using rooms more this year? Are they using chambers more? Are they using plates more? Are they using spring sounding reverb more? Damn. It's all that stuff adds up to making something sound dated. If your bass sound sounds like, a Fender P bass, just going through a limiter and that's it, you've added nothing else to it, and then you combine that with like a rich chamber sound with a 3-second decay on it, and a Mutron biphaser sound, it's going to sound very 1981. So just taking the same piece of music and taking those sounds out of it can make it sound more contemporary.
Right. It's really some just approaches too. I think, when you go back to 70s or 80s and things like that, what you heard a lot of was one or two reverbs used on, to some degree, on most of the tracks of the mix.
Yeah.
Right. That's not really being done today in many, many different disparate genres.
Yeah.
What I hear is that reverb is used specifically on certain elements in a mix, and then not on others. And it's not always the same ones. It's more used to make a certain thing kind of stand out and make another thing not stand out. So it might be like your melody is drenched in some really, really long plate reverb, and then your drums are extremely dry.
Yeah.
Or you have a big room on your hand claps and your piano is really dry. That kind of stuff, as opposed to putting some amount of one or two different reverbs on everything to make it feel like it's in a cohesive space. That's done a lot less now. That's the kind of thing that's making something sound current or making something sound dated.
You're absolutely right. Being an engineer, from 1974, 75 until, I'm trying to remember. Last time I did anything in studio was 96, I think. For the early part of my career, yeah, that's what we strive to do. was create reverb. And you're right, we would put it on send one, send two, and add varying degrees of one or two types of reverb to many things. And that was to put it in a room, in a space. And that's because the studios back then were really dead sounding. So, I mean, really dead, like carpeted walls, carpeted ceilings, carpeted
Hmm.
floors, and a little, 16 square foot area with a little, parquet wood on the floor. So, yeah, we really had to add a lot of reverb to bring things back to sounding live. And you're right. I listen to records now, and it's used as an effect, not as a space creation tool. Um, let's talk about the business side of the production music industry. I have given the recommendation before to not fall in love with a single publisher and put all your eggs in that basket. But I certainly understand the the joy that it brings to a musician's heart when they finally get a call back from somebody that says, "Man, I love that track. Can you make more of those?" Sure, I can. And look at that. They're talking to me. They like me. They love my music. They appreciate me. And the next thing you know, you've got 62 tracks in that one library. And a year later, you're going, but they haven't placed anything. So, uh, would you agree with me? And can you elaborate on the don't put all your eggs in one basket just because somebody loves you?
No, I absolutely agree with that. And and like you said, that's easy to do because you get that, you get that first call and you think it's, oh, everything's fantastic. But really, it's better to spread yourself around, particularly because, they're not all competing with each other for the same things.
Yeah, for
So,
the most part, they're really not
right.
in many
So
cases.
yeah, although I recently found something really odd. I don't know if this happens to others, but I had two different pieces used in the same episode of a show that came from two different publishers. Um,
That's
Very odd.
not that unusual.
Not that unusual.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I can't say it happens half the time, but I can say I've heard of it several times before,
Okay.
especially for people that have stuff in many libraries. The odds of that happening go up, obviously. So,
Right. Well, I
um,
guess it went up for me. Although I also want to say that what you mentioned earlier about someone saying that your music is awesome. That is one of the worst things that happened to me in the last couple of years, because I, uh, I sent a track to a publisher, and I think that was literally what the response was. This track is awesome. Can you do 4 or 5 more? And I couldn't write anything for 9 or 10 days. Um,
why?
I couldn't make anything that I felt was as good as
Uh,
awesome
right, you're now
track.
competing with yourself.
Competing with myself, and I feel like I can get over that now. But when that happened, that was really tough. I didn't expect that, and I thought rejection was bad. Success is a little bad if you don't deal with it properly. It's hard, but back to what you're saying. Yeah, I think spreading yourself around is what makes the most sense, because, like I said, they're not really always competing with each other for the same kinds of things, and especially when you do some different things. Different publishers are going to be the more or less appropriate for specific genres than others. Um, so, just because you've got one that, say, for example, you've done uh, hip hop tracks for, and then you've also got some other pop music, or you have some other rock music, so that might not be the right publisher for that. So they might decide to sign it, and then it'll just sit there
you know,
because it's
I,
not really what they provide for their clients.
a really good publisher, and I've met some that have done this. Excuse me, one in particular actually called me to get the name of another music library owner's like cell phone. He said, I just heard something great, but it's not right for my catalog and my clientele, but I think it'd be great for what they do. Can you hook me up with that guy? And I thought that was very menschy of him. So I want to elaborate on that a little bit, that um, Music Library A may do almost exclusively instrumental stuff that lands in a lot of reality shows. Music Library B might also do a lot of instrumental stuff, but they've got several ins with ESPN and Fox Sports and a lot of the sports networks. So they need different kinds of instrumental music. They might need, like ballsy rock stuff or football highlights or really edgy hip hop stuff for boxing or football, kind of masculine sounding stuff. So they both are music libraries. They both do primarily instrumental music. But if you do a light cocktail jazz piano piece that might work in the background of a reality show that's got a dinner scene in it, that same piece of music won't work in the catalog that does primarily sports. So that's another reason to spread your music around to different catalogs. Have you noticed that some libraries get more placements for you than other libraries?
Well, I think the jury's a little out on that still too.
Kind of early.
I think I've got several publishers where I have around the same number of placements from each, and a couple of others where like I said, are outside the U.S. So I haven't seen any of that information just yet. So
Gotcha.
I'm still waiting to get a better handle on that.
Let's talk about being perceived as a professional when you're dealing with these folks. When they send you that first email or they call you, I think so many people are just flabbergasted that, wow, this is my first entree into the business. So they're either scared to death or nervous energy makes them like, so I've got a bunch of other stuff. Do you want to hear it? And I can do this genre and I can do that genre. It's almost like being too desperate on a first date, I guess, would be the equivalent of that. Although I've never done that, but how have you navigated the waters of coming across like a professional that this company would want to do business with on a long, ongoing basis? Are there any tips that you have?
Well, I think it mostly goes back to two things. One is communicate clearly and effectively. So, don't ramble on. And the second thing is, which this probably goes for just about any aspect of life, is say what you're going to do and do what you said you're going to do. That's pretty much all it takes. There
Give an
might
example.
be, well, and just simply if someone says, if you get a response from someone says, hey, I really like this track that we got forwarded from Taxi. Do you have any other material like it? Okay. So first of all, respond in a reasonable amount of time.
What's
That's
a
the number one.
reasonable amount of time? Is it
And a
like,
reasonable amount of time is probably what is way faster than you would expect to get responded back from. So always assume that this is the way I kind of think of it. I always assume I've got all the time in the world and the other person doesn't have any time at all. They're way busier than me. So I need to be as responsive as I can, even though they may not be very responsive back.
so is it fair to say if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon for you in Albuquerque, somebody says, hey, Greg, by the way, can you do happy hip hop? You would get back to them 5 minutes after you get that text or that email, maybe an hour later. I mean,
I would certainly get back before the end of the same day.
right. So you're not going to wait until the next day because they may
No.
go, oh, I haven't heard from him. Maybe he's on vacation or maybe he's on another project. I'm going to reach out to somebody else. So you look like a winner. If you get back to them in a pretty short amount of time, they go, that's cool, man. The guy got back to me.
Right. And even if you don't have a response, it's still best to get back. So for example, somebody says, I don't, do you have any more material like this? And you're out, you're not even at home. You get this email on your phone. You should still respond and say, hey, I'm glad you like that track. I'll have to review some of my material. I can't do that right now, but I will do it and pick a reasonable time. Like I'll do it tomorrow and get back to you.
Yeah. Or you can even
Don't,
say, I'm at a movie, on date night with my wife. Let me check it when I get home in 2 hours. They would
absolutely.
appreciate the honesty and the directness.
Right. As long as you communicate clearly and you do it timely. And then the second half of that is to say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. So if it's like, if they ask you for additional music, you say, just always tell the truth. If you have music, you say, yeah, I have it, and here it is. Or I don't have anything like that. But I can create more. And then you've got to pick a reasonable time that you can do it in, and then you've got to do it in that amount of time. So if you say, hey, by the end of next week, I can write you 3 more tracks, then you've got to do that.
And you'd be even better off delivering it a day early just to have them.
Oh, absolutely.
They would love that.
Absolutely.
To have
Just
a
absolutely they
musician
do.
that actually delivers early.
Right. So my motto is always under promise, over deliver.
Yep.
And if somebody asks me for something, like somebody says, hey, can you do this by the end of Tuesday? I say, absolutely. And I send it to them on Tuesday morning.
What about if they
Always
ask
beat
for
the deadline.
something that you don't feel confident doing? Let's say they ask you for a big, lush orchestral hybrid trailer piece and they need it in 72 hours and you're already on other projects or you don't feel like you can do that form of music as well as the guys who do it well. Would you ever say to them, that's not an area of great expertise for me? However, I know somebody else that you should be aware of that can probably deliver something great and on time and turn them on to another composer?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, being truthful is always the best policy.
Yay.
It doesn't, in the long run, it couldn't possibly serve you well to say you can do something that you can't do. Because if they ask you for something that you don't do well and if you give them something and it isn't very good, they're probably not going to ask you for anything else, even the things you do well.
Right.
Because you just haven't met their expectation. So if you get asked for something that you don't do, it's easy to say, hey, that's not something that I do very much. And or just change the expectations. Instead of saying no, say, I don't do that very often, but I can certainly give it a try for you if you'd like. So you kind of lower the expectation for yourself. And then they might say, hey, you know what? Maybe I do have a different source and I'll come back to you for something else that you do well. But it's always better to be truthful, and it's always better to not take on things, not do what you say you're going to do. That's the paramount thing.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you don't do something that you said you were going to do, you've pretty much spoiled that relationship, or at least you have a big chance of having spoiled that relationship.
You've put
And it's a relationship kind of a business.
absolutely. Yeah. You've created an image of yourself in their mind as somebody who might not be the best guy to go to next time for that. Even though they
Right.
may not blacklist you, they may not hate you for it, they may not call anybody else in the industry and say, don't use that guy because he screwed this up. You will still have that veil of not so fast.
Right. And again, it may not be very, it certainly isn't malicious or purposeful. If someone asks you to do something by Friday and you get it to them on Saturday, you don't know how important Friday meant. For that person, it could have been completely arbitrary and Saturday is fine.
Yeah.
Or it could have been an absolute drop dead date that came from somewhere else and they needed it by then.
Right. They needed it because they have a long-standing relationship with a music supervisor who says, can you get me happy hip hop? And they go, Greg Carrozza is the perfect guy for that. And they need it by Friday, 4 p.m. in LA. And you don't deliver, but they already told the music supervisor, I'll have it in your hands by dinner time Friday. And they call you at 5:30 and go, Greg, where is it? And you
Where
go,
is it?
I forgot. And now they've got a music supervisor who no longer trusts them to be professional because you weren't.
Right.
Right. It's the sequential chain of events that could cause you to be blacklisted, at least in that guy's mind, forever. Um, let's talk about, we're getting close to the end here, but I want to talk about publishing for a minute. Virtually
Mhm.
everybody who music library deals in the context of publishing. Virtually everybody who's ever taken any sort of music law class or music publishing class in college has probably been told, or even by friends or bandmates over the years, never give up your publishing for free. But it's pretty much a standard. It's not 100%, but it's probably 80, 90% of the contracts that are offered by various production music libraries generally don't buy out the publisher's share. If it's an exclusive deal, they get 100% of the publisher's share, and you, the musician, get to keep 100% of the writer's share. So it's a 50-50 deal, but they
Hmm.
haven't paid you for anything. Am I wish that they could get $500 for the publisher share every time. That's the way the industry used to work 15, 20 years ago, but it's not anymore. Do you ever feel like you've been ripped off because you've done that deal, or do you feel like you're working with a partner that they make as much as you make, therefore you've done your part, now they're going to do theirs?
Yeah, that's exactly the way I view it. They earn their share by doing all the legwork, by having the connections for people who need to use the music. I can't do that myself. If I were doing that myself, I'd be the publisher, and so then I should keep the publishing share. But I think they do that to earn that. That's what they do to earn the share, particularly considering that there is, overwhelmingly no upfront money for most of these kinds of placements, particularly when it comes to reality TV or those kind of things. Those things don't pay any upfront fee. It's just the royalties that come, performance royalties that come after the actual usage.
It's funny.
So
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't know you had more.
no, I was going to reiterate that I think that that's totally fair. I don't see why anybody would be against doing that kind of deal. Now, I've heard of, and I've been offered and done a couple of these deals where I've been paid upfront money for a portion of the writer's share.
Right.
And that's a double-edged sword that is, kind of, you have to think a little bit more about. As we talked about in part one, many usages can generate, small dollars on an individual basis when a track is used. $7 here and $8 and $4 and $15, that kind of a thing. So if someone offers you some upfront money for a portion of those dollars, you kind of have to think a little bit more about whether it's worth doing that or not.
This is where math from from freshman year in high school, your algebra comes in.
Well, right. I mean, if you're, for example, if you're offered, I don't know, if you're offered like $100 for half of your writer's share, then if the track in its lifetime of usage earns more than 200, then you made a bad deal.
Right.
Right. But on the other hand, you might want to look at it beyond an individual track basis. Maybe you do 10 tracks for $1,000, giving up half the writer's share, and then maybe only one or two of them ever wind up getting placements. So the 10 of them may not generate $2,000 over a period of time. So maybe it was a good deal. So it really all depends on how you think about it. I mean, I think in the long term, it's not a trend that I would like to see, either having to give up any of the writer's share, whether it be for money or not, in the long term. But the kinds of stories that I hear from some publishers is that their clients are trying to make some money on the music as well.
Oh yeah.
And so
Becoming
they're setting up their own publishing entity, and they're making a deal where they're taking some of the publisher share from the publisher. So now the publisher is not actually making all of their publisher share. And so they're trying to get some of that money back by getting some of the writer's share.
I remember in the early days of Taxi, we would run listings for shows on MTV looking for instrumental cues, and they paid no money up front. They were probably the first big entity that wasn't paying anything up front for music, but you would make your money on the performance royalties through ASCAP or BMI on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
I probably had a couple of dozen phone calls or nasty emails from people saying, screw you, screw your company. I can't believe that you support those creeps because they're not giving us any money up front. Now, those same people that wrote me those emails back in the day are extremely desirous of getting their music on Catfish for no money up front, because the back end on Catfish, because the show airs so many times, so many repeats, and is syndicated all over the world, that's kind of the prize for instrumental composers, is getting stuff on Catfish. It pays
Mhm.
better than most because of the repetitions. So it's
Right.
funny how things change over time. You got to roll with it. But I completely agree with you that once people start dipping into the writer's share, which has always been sacrosanct, that's a very slippery slope and a very dangerous place to go. And the scary part is that there are always new, young, and I don't mean young age wise, I mean young in the industry, people who are like anything that they need to do to say, I got my music in a TV show, they will do that deal. And that undercuts the people who have worked hard for the last 5 or 10 years to get there. So there's always going to be that factor, and that does scare me. It's something to look out for. So now that I've laid out that scary thing for the future, do you have any just general thoughts or final words on people who, um, you know, just any thoughts? What would you say if you were standing in front of a room full of 100 musicians right now that are all thinking about getting into doing music for media? Anything you'd like to share with them?
Well, I think we have mentioned it earlier, but I would reiterate that it's an extremely long process, and don't give up if you don't have immediate success, because it's just unlikely that you'll have immediate success. But it is more likely that you will have success the more time you put into it. And that's really what you've got to, if it's important to you, then you really got to dedicate time to it, and not just time in the day, but years of your life. Put in the time, and it will eventually pay off. And let's face it, we're musicians do not create for money. Creators don't create for money. We do it because it's innate. It is in us to create things. And we're going to do it regardless of whether there's some form of compensation or not,
Mhm.
which is unfortunately why music continues to get devalued and devalued, because it's going to continue to exist and be great even if there's no financial compensation and we get taken advantage of. But my point is that it's a long process, and we're going to do it anyway. So continue to put in the effort, and it'll eventually work out for you. If you keep trying, you keep improving, you keep being objective with yourself, you keep raising the bar for yourself, it will eventually work.
It's great advice. This has been a great interview. Seriously, one of the best interview subjects I've done in 12 years of doing this sort of thing.
Oh,
I want to
shucks.
mention our really, really good. I want to mention to our viewers to go check out Greg's website. There will be a link posted below the video. But gregcarrozza.com, that's GregCarrozza, gregcarrozzamusic.com. Forgot that.
Actually, I have both. You can go to gregcarrozza.com too. That's
Oh,
just fine.
oh, good to know. Okay. Thanks, Greg. I will hopefully see you in November if we can
Oh,
safely have a Taxi Road rally.
I
If
hope so.
yeah, in the chat room on Taxi TV. But thank you for doing this. You did a great job. Really appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Greg Carrozza. Take care, Greg.